Look, I'm not the kind of guy who believes in the bogeyman or urban legends. But after what happened 5 years ago in the deep timber of the Sawtooth Range, I don't go anywhere without a sidearm and a GPS tracker that my brother monitors every hour. Because the truth is, the woods don't just have ears, they have a memory. And sometimes they decide you're part of the collection. It all started during a summer when I was basically a walking ghost, just 3 months out of a divorce that had absolutely leveled me, leaving me with nothing but a rusted-out Ford F-150 and a desperate, bone-deep need to be so far away from him. Cell service, and I'm sorry Hallmark cards, that I could actually hear my own thoughts again. I've been a scout my whole life, almost made eagle, and my old man raised me to believe that a man with a compass and a rifle is never truly lost. So I did what any rational person in a midlife crisis at 28 does. I went hunting for a ghost spot on an old, archived backpacking forum from the early 2000s. I found these coordinates for a place, deep in the Idaho backcountry. A spot so far off the Forest Service maps that the GPS on my dash started flickering like it was having a seizure the moment I turned off the main logging road. And I just kept driving, pushing through overgrown brush that screamed against the paint of my truck, feeling this weird, intoxicating rush of finally being unreachable. By the time the trail grew too narrow for the Ford, I shut the engine off and the silence was so heavy, it felt like a physical weight on my chest. But as I stepped out to survey the clearing, my heart didn't just drop, it went cold, because right there, in the center of what was supposed to be a forgotten paradise, stood an old, olive-drab canvas tent. It was a relic, something from the 80s, caked in a layer of black mold so thick it looked like velvet. And the smell that hit me wasn't just rotting pine, was the metallic, clawing stench of something that had stopped breathing along. Time ago, I stood there for a good 5 minutes, my hand instinctively resting on my Remington 700, calling out a hello that sounded pathetic and thin against the towering pines. But there was no answer, just the wind whistling through the moldy flaps. Curiosity is a hell of a drug when you've got nothing left to lose, so I used a stick to peel back the zipper, and what I found inside wasn't a body, thank God, but it was worse in a way: an empty, stained sleeping bag and a small, leather-bound notebook sitting on a pile of rusted soup cans. I grabbed that notebook, my lungs burning from the stench, and scrambled back into the fresh air, flipping through pages that were nothing but thousands upon thousands of tally marks, organized in groups of 7, ending on a page with 42 clusters over 8 months of someone sitting in that rot, counting ... Something I should have left right then. Any sane person would have put that truck in reverse and never looked back. But I convinced myself I was just being paranoid, that maybe it was some eccentric hermit who'd moved on, so I set up my own camp on the far side of the clearing, keeping my rifle leaned against a stump and the notebook in my pocket like a cursed talisman. As the sun dipped below the jagged peaks, the forest changed. The shadows grew long and jagged like teeth, and I found myself staring at that green tent until my eyes ached, watching for a flicker of movement that never came. I eventually crawled into my bag, the silence of the wilderness replaced by the rhythmic thumping of my own pulse, and I fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep until a sound snapped me awake that made every hair on my arm stand up. It was whispering. Not the wind, not an animal, but the distinct, low-frequency murmur of 2, maybe 3 people standing maybe 20 feet from my tent, their voices overlapping in a language that sounded like English but lacked any recognizable syntax, just a wet, sibilant hissing that felt like it was vibrating in my teeth. I froze, my hands sliding toward the Remington, my breath hitching as I realized they weren't just talking, they were circling. The crunch of dry needles underfoot moving in a slow, predatory orbit around my nylon walls. Then the scratching started a slow, deliberate dragging of fingernails against the rainfly, rhythmic and patient, as if they were testing the tension of the fabric to find a weak spot. I felt this primal, electric surge of terror, the kind that tells you that you are no longer the apex predator. And when the zipper on my tent door gave a sharp, metallic tug, I didn't think, I just acted. I chambered around that heavy, mechanical clack-clack that usually sends anything with a brain running and I screamed, "I have a gun, and I will put a hole in the first thing that comes through this flap. Back the hell off." The silence that followed was absolute, a void of sound that lasted for 5 seconds of pure agony, before suddenly the forest erupted with the sound of multiple sets of feet not running together, but scattering in different directions, bare. Feet slapping against the earth with a speed that felt unnatural. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, rifle across my lap, watching the silhouettes of the trees shift in the moonlight, feeling like a specimen under a microscope, and the moment the first grey light of dawn touched the meadow, I unzipped my tent, ready for a fight. The green tent was gone. Not moved, not collapsed, gone, as if it had never existed, leaving no depression in the grass, no stake holes, nothing but the undisturbed earth where I'd spent hours staring at it the day before. My stomach did a slow, nauseating roll as I walked over to the spot, but then I looked at the massive pine tree at the edge of the clearing and I nearly dropped my rifle, because there, carved fresh into the bark at eye level, were 7 new groups of tally marks and the start of an 8th. And just below that, hanging from a low branch by a thick piece of translucent fishing line, was a squirrel, its ribcage opened with surgical precision, positioned as if it were climbing toward the carvings. It wasn't a kill for food, it was a message, a signature, a way of saying we were here while you slept, and we could have been closer. I didn't pack. I threw my gear into the bed of the truck in a chaotic pile, my hand shaking so hard I could barely turn the key. And as I backed out of that narrow trail, I felt eyes on me from every shadow, a collective gaze that felt heavy. An ancient. I've spent a lot of time thinking about those tally marks and that squirrel, about who or what is out there in the Helena Lewis and Clark National Forest, counting the days in groups of 7, and why they let me leave when they clearly had every opportunity to make me the next mark on that tree. Some people tell me I stumbled onto a cult, others say it was just some deranged mountain men playing a sick game with a city boy. But I know what I felt that night. It wasn't just malice, it was a sense of ceremony. Like I was an uninvited guest at a ritual I wasn't supposed to survive. Now, I'm curious what you think, because the more I tell this story, the more I realize that everyone has a different theory on what constitutes justice in the wild. Was I wrong to stay that first night? Or is there something fundamentally broken in our world that drives people to live in the rot and shadows? Drop a comment below. Tell me if you think those people were even people at all. Or if I'm just lucky to be the one telling the story instead of being the one hanging from the branch.